Jonathan Thorne had everything: enormous wealth, a circle of influential friends, and the glamorous life most people could only dream of. Yet, he was convinced that none of it mattered as much as the woman he loved, Isabella Harrington. With a baby on the way, he believed they stood on the brink of building the perfect future. But a single evening changed everything. Over an intimate dinner at an opulent estate, Isabella's startling confession cracked the foundation of Jonathan's world, threatening to shatter every illusion of loyalty he held dear. What could she possibly reveal that would upend their entire relationship? Jonathan Thorne was born in the coastal city of Newport, Rhode Island. His father, Robert Thorne, had been a highly respected schoolteacher, while his mother, Harriet Thorne, was a part-time piano instructor with a fragile heart that forced her into early retirement. Growing up, Jonathan developed a deep appreciation for both education and the arts, blending an almost obsessive curiosity about the world with a romantic vision. He wasn't born into money. Everything he had, he earned through unwavering persistence and an unquenchable thirst for success. When he was 15, he discovered his knack for creative business ideas. He'd hustle around town washing cars, delivering groceries, and, on weekends, tutoring younger children in math. By 17, Jonathan was running a modest but successful neighborhood tutoring company. His neighbors joked he was the youngest entrepreneur around, but he carried with him something else, a quiet determination to never be trapped by poverty or limited options. This business-savvy approach continued into college, where Jonathan studied both engineering and economics. He juggled multiple part-time gigs while developing a revolutionary tech idea, an algorithmic trading software that could predict market trends using complex data analysis. The brilliance of his concept captured the attention of local angel investors who recognized they had something unique on their hands. Despite being offered comfortable positions at big tech companies, Jonathan decided to chart his own course. He launched a startup with his best friend from college, Malcolm Pierce, who had a similarly sharp mind and unstoppable ambition. Their bond was cemented by hours spent in the university library, both of them spouting off code, analyzing markets, and shaping a dream they believed would transform the finance world. Within 4 years, the software, branded Brightwave Trading Solutions, gained traction, attracting not just modest investors, but also some leading luminaries on Wall Street. At 27, Jonathan sold a minority stake of Brightwave for a staggering sum, and that payoff enabled him to buy a modern, glass-encased penthouse in Manhattan. Meanwhile, Malcolm remained on board as CEO, and the success continued to snowball. With his newfound wealth, Jonathan could have indulged in any number of vices. At first, he did sample the typical temptations: penthouse parties, expensive whiskey, designer suits, and high-end sports cars. He was seen attending exclusive events, from the Met Gala to philanthropic galas organized by the likes of the Rockefeller Foundation. Yet, in private, Jonathan's core values never changed. He still remembered working at the dining table until midnight, hardly able to keep his eyes open, all for a few extra dollars to support his mother's medical bills. Those memories anchored him. He also began branching out with philanthropy. Charitable causes called to him, especially ones that involved technology for education or providing resources for underprivileged children. He reasoned that his own life might have been different if he'd never had the opportunities or mentors who believed in him. From free coding camps to scholarship funds, Jonathan made it his mission to give back. Despite being highly visible in high society, his name even appeared in a few issues of Forbes, he valued privacy. Over the years, he dated high-profile women, mostly socialites or rising stars in the art world. But nothing lasted more than a few months. Most relationships ended either because of the chaos of his schedule or because he realized they were infatuated with the lifestyle more than with him. But then he met Isabella Harrington at a fundraiser for inner-city youth. She wasn't dazzling in an obvious way, nor was she a celebrity or a wealthy heiress. She was an event volunteer, carrying a clipboard, wearing comfortable shoes instead of stilettos, and darting around the venue to ensure everything ran smoothly. Something about her struck him, a genuine compassion in her eyes. Her laughter was unrestrained, her conversation refreshingly sincere. That evening, she was too busy to even register who Jonathan Thorne was. She was focused on helping a group of kids from a local community center perform a short skit on stage. This initial encounter would bloom into something bigger, a relationship that would occupy Jonathan's heart in a way no other woman ever had. Later, as he reflected on that night, he realized he didn't want a partner dazzled by his money or drawn to him for social climbing. He craved someone with authenticity, and he believed he'd found exactly that in Isabella. Born in the suburbs of Chicago, Illinois, Isabella Harrington, known to her friends as Bella, had grown up in a modest household. Her father, Martin Harrington, was a security guard, and her mother, Paola, an immigrant from Venezuela, juggled multiple jobs. While finances were tight, they made up for it with an unconditional love for their only daughter. Isabella was the kind of child who organized lemonade stands for charity and spent weekends volunteering at the local animal shelter. She dreamed of making a difference in people's lives. That dream led her to major in social work at a state university. Even during school, she earned a reputation as the kind of person who'd give her lunch to a homeless person. She had a motto, better to share than keep. It was her guiding principle, instilled by her mother's deep empathy and her father's quiet honesty. After graduating, she moved to New York City, where she took a job at a non-profit aimed at helping disadvantaged youth find opportunities in technology. She wasn't an expert coder, but she believed passionately in bridging the digital divide. She worked as a program coordinator, connecting donors with students and ensuring they had the resources they needed. This eventually led her to spearhead fundraising events. That was how she and Jonathan had ended up in the same grand ballroom at the charity function. Jonathan's first impression of Isabella had been one of endearment and fascination. She was so involved with making sure the event ran smoothly that she didn't realize he was the keynote speaker, or that he was a wealthy philanthropist. When they finally spoke, it was after he'd delivered a heartfelt speech about bridging opportunity gaps in technology education. Isabella approached him with a quick handshake and a polite smile, then tried to whisk him off to meet the parents of some of the kids. She just wanted him to see directly the lives he was helping to change. Jonathan was captivated by her sincerity. Over the next few months, Isabella and Jonathan talked regularly about philanthropic initiatives. Their conversations soon delved into personal territory, where they grew up, how they saw the world, and what they wanted to do with their futures. Although Jonathan had the means to go anywhere at the drop of a hat, he found himself wanting to spend more time with Isabella. She was, in his eyes, the perfect blend of compassion and intelligence. But Isabella had her share of worries. She recognized Jonathan's generosity, and she saw how people flocked to him. He had a circle of friends who seemed flashy and had appetites for expensive thrills. She didn't want to be lumped in with them, nor did she want to judge them unfairly. She worried about whether she fit into his life. She was the type who meticulously tracked her bills, still shared an apartment in Brooklyn with 2 roommates, and rode the subway. Meanwhile, Jonathan lived in a high-rise penthouse in Manhattan's most desirable neighborhood. Despite these apprehensions, their bond grew. Jonathan found joy in small acts with Isabella, like shopping at farmers' markets or cooking simple pasta dinners. He introduced her to the wonders of Broadway musicals, something she'd never been able to afford herself. Slowly but surely, the differences in their backgrounds became a point of fascination rather than a source of tension. Isabella introduced Jonathan to her parents when they visited New York for Christmas. Martin and Paula weren't sure what to make of a man whose net worth was in the millions, but they appreciated his warmth. He joked with her dad about Chicago sports teams and tried to speak a few sentences in Spanish to show respect for her mum's heritage. While Isabella's parents left New York feeling slightly overwhelmed by Jonathan's status, they also sensed his generosity was genuine. On the professional front, Isabella's dedication at her non-profit job remained unwavering, though now she had a partner who could lend not just financial support, but also crucial connections. Yet she never liked asking Jonathan for help at the office, fearing it might come across as taking advantage of their relationship. And Jonathan respected that boundary. He quietly contributed when it was appropriate, but only when Isabella asked. So, as their relationship advanced, each discovered qualities in the other that felt like missing puzzle pieces in their personal lives. Jonathan's pragmatic approach and unstoppable ambition balanced Isabella's heartfelt activism. At the same time, Isabella grounded Jonathan, helping him remember the humble roots he had come from. Their love seemed unshakable, filled with mutual respect and a shared desire to do good in the world. Neither suspected that beneath these placid waters secrets loomed, secrets that could unravel everything. If only they had known what was going to happen on a night that should have been a celebration. A night that would reveal Isabella's secret, shaking Jonathan's trust to its core. 6 months into their relationship, Isabella began to feel unwell in small but noticeable ways. Sudden waves of nausea, an aversion to certain foods, and fatigue that had her napping in the middle of the day. At first, she dismissed these symptoms as stress. Her job was hectic, and she was juggling multiple projects. But then she missed her period. On a whim, she picked up a pregnancy test during one of her routine grocery runs. The morning she finally took the test, she felt both dread and excitement swirling in her chest. She stared at the result, 2 pink lines, and her heart nearly stopped. She was pregnant. Thoughts collided in her mind. Did Jonathan even want children? Would this end their relationship? Or would he embrace it? Almost immediately, she scolded herself for thinking so negatively. Jonathan was a caring man. Yes, his life might be complicated, but he had shown compassion in more ways than one. So she called him, her voice trembling just slightly, and asked if they could talk over dinner at his penthouse that evening. Jonathan was concerned when he heard the tension in her voice. He offered to come to her place, but she insisted on going to him. At 7 p.m. she arrived, noticing how he had toned down the lighting and set out a simple pasta dish, one of the few meals he actually knew how to cook well. She felt a swirl of gratitude. He was trying so hard to create a warm atmosphere, even though he had no idea what she was about to tell him. They ate for a few minutes, making small talk. He asked if her day at the non-profit had been demanding. She replied in half sentences, uncertain how to break the news. Finally, Isabella laid her fork down and, with quiet resolution, told him, "I'm pregnant, Jonathan." For a moment, Jonathan sat very still. His eyes widened, then his lips parted in an expression of surprise. Isabella waited for words, her mind already spinning with anxiety. Instead of speaking, he reached across the table, took her hand, and squeezed it gently. Then, as if waking from a daze, he stood up, came around to her side, and pulled her into a tight embrace. He spoke softly against her hair. "We'll figure this out." together. Isabella felt tears of relief threatening to escape. She had imagined a range of reactions: shock, denial, hesitation, but his immediate acceptance swept away her worst fears. Over the coming days, they talked about the practical aspects: whether she would move in with him, how her job might be affected by a pregnancy, and the best time to tell friends and family. Jonathan, who had always been meticulous about planning, was surprisingly calm, reminding her they had the resources to handle it all. Word began to spread among their closest circles that Isabella was expecting. She confessed her concern to her parents, and though initially startled, Martin and Paula were thrilled at the thought of becoming grandparents. Jonathan's parents, Robert and Harriet, were also supportive, if a bit stunned by how quickly things were moving. In the months that followed, Isabella saw a nurturing side of Jonathan that melted her heart. He insisted she slow down at work, though she refused to stop entirely. He took her to doctor's appointments, read books on fatherhood, and even considered taking a paternity leave from his own business affairs to ensure he could be there during the baby's first months. It was an almost picture-perfect display of devotion. What neither of them realized, however, was that pressure was mounting on Isabella in a different corner of her life, one that would eventually force her to reveal a hidden aspect of her past. For now, though, the pregnancy felt like a miracle, a bond that affirmed their love story. They began discussing possible baby names: Elena if a girl, Sebastian if a boy, and daydreaming about the day they would bring new life into the world. But the day of the baby shower was overshadowed by a phone call Isabella received from a number she never thought she'd hear from again. It was a voice that symbolized a chapter she had hoped to bury, a mistake she prayed would never haunt her. She convinced herself that it was probably just an old acquaintance wanting to check in. Little did she know, this phone call would start a chain of events that would lead to her shocking confession at dinner, and Jonathan's world crashing down around him. As Isabella's pregnancy progressed, her belly began to show a gentle curve. Jonathan, ever eager, loved placing his hand there to feel any possible kicks. During this time, they grew closer than ever, sharing the excitement of doctor visits, preparing a nursery in Jonathan's penthouse, and even searching for a quieter home outside the hustle and bustle of Manhattan. Jonathan had a real estate agent scout properties in upstate New York, with spacious lawns and plenty of sunlight. While life on the surface was blissful, Isabella couldn't ignore the gnawing anxiety that had settled in her mind ever since she received that unexpected phone call. Late at night, she stared at her phone, the number still there in her call history, a reminder of something she wanted to leave buried. She considered blocking the number, yet something stopped her. Guilt. Fear. Perhaps a sense that running away would only make matters worse. Jonathan, for his part, started noticing changes in Isabella's demeanor. She grew more distant at odd moments, sometimes lost in thought during dinners or while lying beside him in bed. When he asked if something was bothering her, she often chalked it up to pregnancy-related stress. While he accepted that explanation at first, his instincts told him there was more going on. Around this time, Isabella was working closely with a private donor named Samantha Liu, a well-known philanthropist who was considered a rising star in the philanthropic world. Samantha, along with a few associates, was planning a major fundraising gala to support children from low-income neighborhoods who excelled in STEM subjects. Jonathan vaguely knew Samantha from past events, but he didn't pay much attention to the day-to-day details of Isabella's job. Still, whenever Samantha's name came up, Isabella tensed ever so slightly. The phone call came again, this time while Isabella was alone in the penthouse, having left work early due to a sudden wave of fatigue. She recognized the number instantly and felt her heart pound against her ribcage. Hesitating only a moment, she picked up the phone. A quiet male voice said her name. "Bella, it's me." She stood mute for a moment. He waited, then added, "I really need to see you." She felt her throat tighten. "This isn't a good time," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please," the voice insisted. "It's important." She swallowed. She couldn't hang up on him, but she also knew the risk of continuing. I don't think that's a good idea. My life is complicated right now. I'm about to have a baby." A pause on the other end. Then he said, "I know. That's why I need to see you." Before she could argue, he ended with, "Meet me at Cafe Aurelia tomorrow at noon. Don't stand me up." The call ended. Isabella felt a tremor in her limbs. Cafe Aurelia was a quaint, tucked-away place near the financial district. Hardly anyone she knew went there. She bit her lip, fighting off the sense that she had no choice but to comply. This was the last thing she wanted. Yet it was happening. The next day, after making an excuse at work, she snuck out to Cafe Aurelia. Her head throbbed with tension. Standing in a corner booth was a tall man with a lean physique, wearing a worn leather jacket. His name was Ethan Walker, a piece of her past she had prayed she'd never have to acknowledge again. Ethan's eyes darted to her midsection, noticing the pregnancy immediately. "So it's true," he said quietly, sliding into a seat. Isabella hesitated a moment before joining him. "Why are you here, Ethan?" she asked, voice trembling with anger and fear. "I told you I wanted nothing to do with you." He raised his hands in a placating gesture. "I'm not here to cause trouble, Bella, but you and I have unfinished business." "Unfinished?" she repeated, the word bitter on her tongue. She glanced at her phone, half expecting Jonathan to call. An overwhelming sense of betrayal churned in her stomach. Betrayal of the good life she'd found with Jonathan. Betrayal of the unborn child who deserved a stable future. She looked back at Ethan. "I left that part of my life behind." I moved on. Ethan stared at her, unblinking. "Things can't just be erased, Bella. Especially now. You know what you owe me." Her eyes flickered with a mix of guilt and anger. She wanted to say she owed him nothing, but the truth was murkier. They argued in hushed tones, the cafe's ambient noise covering their heated exchange. By the time they parted ways, Isabella felt sick with dread. Ethan demanded money or some form of help, referencing a debt that dated back years. If she didn't comply, he threatened to drop by her workplace, or worse, contact Jonathan. Isabella barely remembered leaving the cafe. She walked down the street in a daze, tears threatening to spill. Unbeknownst to her, a pair of eyes followed her from a discreet distance, one of Samantha Lou's associates, who recognized Isabella and took note of the mysterious man she was meeting. That evening, while Jonathan thought everything was normal, Isabella spent most of her time in the bathroom, regaining composure. She told him it was morning sickness acting up again, which he believed, though he looked more worried than ever. The guilt began eating at her. She knew she was lying to the man she claimed to love. But Ethan's threat loomed. She was determined to keep her secret, no matter the cost. Jonathan's philanthropic commitments and board meetings kept him busy in the ensuing weeks. Meanwhile, Isabella tried to manage the looming crisis. Ethan was a ghost from her past she once trusted. Back then, he'd been her confidant when she first arrived in New York, young and naive, looking to make a difference in the world. He had introduced her to certain questionable opportunities, shady side jobs, and a circle that thrived on quick money. Though she never engaged in anything blatantly illegal, she discovered that Ethan might have. When she realized how wrong it all felt, she extricated herself from that circle. She had believed that was the end of it. Now Ethan was back, resurrecting old tensions. He refused to fade into oblivion unless Isabella paid him a significant sum, a sum he claimed she'd promised years ago, though her memory of that promise was hazy. Perhaps it was an off-handed remark made in desperation. Maybe she was partially at fault. But the money Ethan demanded was outrageous, even if Jonathan could easily afford it. The problem was that paying it behind Jonathan's back without raising suspicion felt almost impossible. Despite her internal chaos, Isabella worked tirelessly at the non-profit, hoping that burying herself in her duties would somehow drown out her anxieties. Samantha Liu's upcoming gala was the major focus. Every detail had to be flawless. One morning, Samantha summoned Isabella to her office, her voice all business. She wanted to discuss additional strategies to reach new donors. But the moment Isabella sat down, Samantha's gaze sharpened. "I saw you meeting someone at Cafe Aurelia last week," she said. "I was there for a quick meeting with a potential donor. Your conversation looked intense." Isabella froze. She tried to recall if she'd spotted Samantha, but she was too preoccupied with Ethan to notice anyone else. She forced a neutral expression. "It was just someone from my past, Samantha," she replied softly. "Nothing I can't handle." Samantha pressed her lips together. "I'm not here to pry. But your personal matters can't jeopardize this gala. It's too important." She paused, then added, "Jonathan is a major supporter, and so are others who follow him. Whatever is happening, try to keep it under control." Isabella nodded. As she left, she couldn't shake the suspicion that Samantha might be holding on to more information. A subtle tension existed between them. Samantha's philanthropic reputation was immaculate, but that didn't mean she was devoid of ambition or cunning. She was known to be fiercely protective of her events and donors. Isabella wondered if Samantha might use this knowledge about Ethan to her advantage, or if she was genuinely concerned. As the days ticked closer to the gala, Isabella felt her life dividing into parallel tracks. On one track, she continued life as Jonathan's devoted partner, excitedly preparing for the baby's arrival, attending birthing classes, finalizing nursery decor, and politely avoiding questions from friends who noticed her occasional dips in mood. On the other track, she tiptoed through a minefield with Ethan, negotiating how to keep him silent. Ethan's demands grew steeper. His phone calls became more frequent, more urgent. Isabella's stress soared. She started having nightmares of Jonathan discovering her secret. Sometimes, in moments of panic, she wondered if she should just come clean, apologize, and hope he would understand. But fear always won out. She pictured Jonathan's trust evaporating, and the scandal that could erupt if Ethan decided to stir up trouble. Every day, Jonathan tried to check on her, noticing her frazzled demeanor. More than once he asked, "Is something wrong, Bella? You're not yourself." And every day she found some excuse or reason to placate him. A big project, hormone changes, exhaustion. Her guilt gnawed at her, especially whenever he'd gently lay a hand on her pregnant belly, murmuring sweet words about their future. The tension reached an unprecedented high one evening. Isabella was on the phone with Ethan, trying to finalize a sum she could secretly withdraw from her own account, money she'd saved over the years. It wasn't enough to cover Ethan's demands, but she was hoping at least to placate him. Suddenly, she heard Jonathan's footsteps approaching down the hall. She quickly ended the call, her heart hammering. Jonathan entered the living room. He paused, noticing the phone in her hand, her tense posture. Something flickered in his eyes. Suspicion or pain? But he said nothing, merely asked if she wanted anything from the kitchen. She stammered a no, grateful for the excuse to slip into the bedroom. She crouched by the bed, her hands pressed to her abdomen, tears pricking at her eyes. She couldn't keep living this lie. Yet the fear of losing Jonathan, of jeopardizing the family they were building, felt like too huge a risk. Little did she know that the turning point was fast approaching. Their secrets would soon be forced into the open at a dinner that was meant to be a celebration, but would become the stage for her devastating confession. The night of Samantha Lou's highly anticipated gala arrived. The venue was the regal Imperial Hall, a lavish space adorned with crystal chandeliers and gilded columns. High-profile guests arrived in designer gowns and tailored suits, stepping out of black cars onto a red carpet lined with reporters. Jonathan and Isabella arrived fashionably late, partly because Isabella needed extra time to dress in a way that comfortably accommodated her pregnant figure. She chose a flowing midnight blue gown that complemented her complexion, while Jonathan opted for a classic tuxedo. They made an elegant couple, drawing whispered admiration as they entered. On the surface, the event was a grand success. Within an hour, sponsors and donors had already surpassed initial fundraising targets. Samantha circulated the room, introducing important guests, making sure each one felt recognized. Meanwhile, Jonathan mingled effortlessly, discussing philanthropic opportunities, technology, and the upcoming birth of his child. Isabella hovered close by, smiling politely, feeling her heart pound whenever she thought she saw a familiar face lurking in the crowd. She half expected Ethan to barge in, but he was nowhere to be seen. Yet tension underpinned every pleasantry. Samantha occasionally shot Isabella probing glances. Isabella tried to avoid them. She also noticed that Jonathan was increasingly watchful, picking up subtle cues from Isabella's body language. As the night progressed, a few acquaintances, particularly those from the philanthropic circuit, congratulated her on the pregnancy, but also remarked that she seemed tired, not her usual vibrant self. Midway through the evening, there was a surprise announcement. Samantha introduced a major donor who had pledged a staggering amount. To Isabella's shock, the donor turned out to be none other than Isaac Westbridge, a venture capitalist known for his contentious business ethics. Isaac stepped onto the stage, delivering a slick speech about giving back to the community. Isabella felt uneasy. She had heard rumors about some questionable deals he'd orchestrated. Jonathan's face remained composed, but he later whispered to Isabella, "Never thought I'd see Westbridge at a charity event. Must be some PR move." After the formal presentations wrapped up, dinner commenced in the banquet hall. Tables were draped in pristine white cloths, each place setting meticulously arranged. Samantha placed Jonathan and Isabella at the main table, alongside herself, Isaac Westbridge, and a few other notable donors. Light classical music played in the background, but Isabella could barely hear it over the pounding in her ears. As waiters served the first course, Samantha tapped her glass. "I want to propose a toast to the generous hearts gathered here," she said, her bright smile contrasting with the calculating glint in her eyes. Everyone raised their glasses. Isabella lifted hers, her hand trembling slightly. For a while, the group engaged in small talk, the success of the event, plans for expansions in philanthropic outreach, and a few personal anecdotes. Jonathan recounted a story of how he'd once pitched an idea in a dingy cafe as a broke college student, which drew chuckles from Isaac. Samantha spoke about the upcoming expansions for the non-profit, praising Isabella's organizational efforts. Isabella tried to swallow her discomfort and forced a polite smile. Everything seemed oddly perfect. Too perfect, like calm waters hiding a deadly current. Suddenly, there was a small commotion at the ballroom entrance. A man, dressed in a crisp suit, politely but firmly, insisted on speaking to Miss Harrington. One of the event staff tried to block him, but Samantha recognized him. With a pointed glance at Isabella, Samantha signaled the staff to let him through. Isabella's blood turned to ice when she realized it was Ethan. He approached the table with a disarming smile, acting as if he were just another guest. Isabella's entire body went rigid. Ethan greeted Samantha, exchanging pleasantries before turning his gaze toward Isabella. His eyes flickered to Jonathan, then to Isabella's belly, and finally settled back on her face. In that moment, Isabella knew the veneer of stability was about to crack. She could see the confusion etched on Jonathan's face as Ethan lingered too long, ignoring social cues to move on. Samantha cleared her throat, trying to diffuse the tension. "Ethan, perhaps we can continue this conversation after dinner." But Ethan didn't budge. He looked at Isabella. His voice carried a hint of bitterness. "I just wanted to congratulate Isabella on her pregnancy. We go way back." Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "You know each other?" A heavy pause. Isabella felt all eyes on her. Her stomach knotted, and she wished she could vanish. "We used to work on some projects together," she managed, her voice unnaturally high. Ethan smiled, a predatory edge to it. "Indeed, Isabella was once instrumental in helping me with a few financial challenges." Confusion turned into suspicion. Jonathan's protective instincts flared. Isaac Westbridge, always sensing drama, leaned forward with mild curiosity. Samantha turned away, not wanting to be part of this fiasco, but also not intervening. "I should go," Ethan said lightly, but not before adding, "Just make sure you remember our conversation, Bella." Then he walked away, leaving Isabella feeling gutted. Jonathan asked no further questions at the table, but his gaze upon her was enough to break her heart. She saw disappointment, uncertainty, and quiet alarm. She tried to steady her breathing, but her head reeled. Samantha quickly steered the conversation back to gala-related matters, tactfully ignoring the palpable tension. Inside, Isabella knew her web of lies was about to unravel. She had to do something. She whispered to Jonathan, "Can we leave early? I'm not feeling well." Jonathan's face softened with concern, overshadowed by the swirl of questions in his mind. "Of course," he replied. They made hurried goodbyes, with Samantha and Isaac politely offering well wishes. As soon as they were outside, Jonathan helped Isabella into the car. Once the door closed and the driver pulled away, the questions began. And Isabella knew the time for half-truths had passed. She could sense Jonathan's quiet heartbreak, even if he hadn't fully grasped the betrayal yet. All she could hope was that he might still find it in his heart to forgive her once he learned the truth. 2 days after the gala, Jonathan decided to host a small dinner at the penthouse. Officially, it was meant to celebrate the progress of Isabella's pregnancy as she entered her second trimester. His parents, Robert and Harriet, were in town, eager to see their soon-to-be grandchild's mother. Isabella's parents, Martin and Paula, had also arrived from Chicago. Even Malcolm Pierce, Jonathan's longtime business partner and close friend, made an appearance with his wife, Fiona. Isabella, however, felt nothing but dread. She knew that Jonathan wanted to address the unsettling encounter with Ethan. He had asked her about it directly, but she had managed to deflect him for the moment. "Let's not discuss it until we're in private," she'd said, her voice tight. He had begrudgingly agreed, but the tension between them was undeniable. That evening, the apartment filled with a subdued sense of anticipation. Harriet complimented Isabella on her glow. Martin teased Jonathan about his fatherhood skills, and Paula fussed over the dinner arrangements. Meanwhile, Malcolm and Fiona tried to lighten the atmosphere with friendly banter, although their shared glances suggested they sensed something was off. By the time everyone was seated around the elegantly set dining table, the mood felt precarious. like a fragile structure that might collapse if pressed too hard. As the main course was served, roasted salmon with vegetables, Jonathan cleared his throat. He looked at Isabella. Everyone paused, utensils clinking to stillness. "Isabella," Jonathan began carefully, "I need you to tell me what's going on. Who is Ethan, and why is he hanging around, causing you distress?" All eyes turned to Isabella. She felt heat flood her cheeks. This wasn't how she wanted the discussion to unfold, but the fuse had already been lit. She swallowed. "It's complicated," she began. "He's someone from my past, someone I met when I first came to New York." Robert Thorne, always the calm observer, asked quietly, "Is it a matter of personal safety? If he's threatening you, we can involve the authorities." Isabella shook her head, tears building. "I'm not exactly in danger physically, but he's blackmailing me." The words spilled out, shocking her parents and Jonathan's family alike. "Blackmailing?" Jonathan repeated, his voice vibrating with concern and anger. "Why?" Isabella closed her eyes briefly. She felt the baby move inside her, a subtle reminder that innocence was at stake here. She had to tell the truth. So she recounted her story in halting fragments, arriving in New York, falling in with a questionable crowd while searching for quick ways to sustain herself, meeting Ethan, who offered her financial shortcuts. At first, she didn't realize how shady it all was. He implied it was connected to philanthropic efforts, but behind the scenes, there were predatory lending practices, questionable real estate flips, and a network of individuals using non-profits to launder funds. Though Isabella never outright participated in illegal activities, she admitted to having known more than she reported to authorities. Feeling morally conflicted, she eventually distanced herself from Ethan and refused to be complicit. She had left him behind, believing she was closing that chapter forever. Now, years later, Ethan demanded a payout, claiming she had promised him hush money or some kind of business settlement in exchange for keeping quiet about certain details that might tarnish her or even drag Jonathan into a scandal by association. By the time she finished, her voice broke under the weight of guilt. She looked at Jonathan, tears staining her face. "I didn't want to lose you. I was afraid that if you knew I'd once been involved with people so unethical, you'd question my loyalty, my moral character. Especially now, with the baby on the way. I was so terrified of losing everything I've built with you." Silence filled the room. Harriet dabbed her eyes with a napkin, and Paula stared at her daughter in disbelief. Martin's jaw was set tight, protective anger simmering beneath the surface. Robert appeared gravely concerned. Malcolm exchanged a glance with Fiona, both at a loss for words. Finally, Jonathan spoke, his tone pained. "Why didn't you trust me enough to tell me earlier? Isabella, you know me better than that. You know I wouldn't abandon you just for a mistake in your past, assuming that's all it is. But the fact that you tried to hide it, it's not just the money or the scandal, it's the breach of trust." Isabella bowed her head. "I'm sorry," she managed, her chest heaving with sobs. "I just couldn't bear the thought of you looking at me differently." A heavy pause followed. Jonathan got up from his seat and circled the table until he stood behind Isabella's chair. Gently, he placed his hands on her shoulders, a gesture both comforting and confining. "I'm hurt," he admitted softly. "I'm angry. But I need you to know. I love you. And I love our child." He exhaled shakily. "We'll figure this out. But no more secrets." Harriet let out a relieved sigh, tears in her eyes. Paula and Martin shared a glance, relief mingling with the lingering sting of revelation. Malcolm, feeling the tension ease slightly, offered, We'll support you both, in any way we can." Fiona nodded in agreement. Isabella broke down then, sobbing into Jonathan's chest as he wrapped his arms around her. She had prepared herself for a much harsher reaction, though she knew the repercussions weren't over. This was only the beginning of what they had to confront with Ethan. The rest of the dinner passed quietly, with subdued conversation and comforting words from family members, but the undercurrent of stress remained tangible. Later that night, after everyone left, Jonathan sat with Isabella on the sofa, listening carefully to every detail she could remember about her past involvement with Ethan. He asked pointed questions about timeline, amounts of money, potential legal ramifications. He was methodical, his business instincts kicking in. By the time dawn crept in, they had formed a tentative plan. They would consult Jonathan's legal team discreetly, gather evidence to protect themselves, and, if necessary, take legal action against Ethan for extortion. Isabella felt both a crushing sense of guilt and a surprising release of tension. The truth was out. Now the question became how to weather the inevitable storm. As she dozed off against Jonathan's chest, she couldn't help but wonder if their relationship was truly strong enough to withstand what might come next. Within days of Isabella's confession, Jonathan wasted no time assembling a discreet team. Malcolm Pierce brought in a trusted attorney, Alexandra Reed, who specialized in financial fraud and corporate law. Alexandra met with Jonathan and Isabella in a private conference room at Brightwave's New York office, far from the prying eyes of the media or any potential gossip sources. There, Isabella recounted everything in detail: her initial involvement with Ethan, the suspicious transactions she'd glimpsed, and her final attempts to sever ties. Alexandra listened intently, taking notes. She posed direct questions, some of which made Isabella's cheeks burn with shame. But Alexandra reassured them both, explaining that the more they knew, the better they could strategize. She also made it clear that if Ethan tried to blackmail them publicly, they had grounds for legal action. However, going public could risk a scandal, which was particularly worrisome given Jonathan's high profile. Jonathan, for his part, was unnervingly composed. After the emotional upheaval during the family dinner, he had shifted into his problem-solving mode. He promised Isabella that he wasn't shutting down emotionally. He just needed to handle the crisis at hand. If Ethan thought he could simply demand money and vanish, he was gravely mistaken. Meanwhile, Ethan continued to text Isabella, growing bolder in his threats. One message read, "If I don't get my money in a week, I'll bring everything out. Don't test me." Isabella showed these messages to Alexandra, who advised them to keep collecting such evidence. Once they had enough, they could approach law enforcement or file a restraining order. Still, the emotional weight of the situation bore down on the couple. In private moments, Jonathan wrestled with his own feelings of betrayal. He trusted that Isabella had revealed the truth now, but he couldn't shake off the sting of her initial secrecy. Late at night, when Isabella would drift to sleep, he'd find himself staring at the city skyline, grappling with uncertainty. Could trust be fully restored? Or would a seed of doubt always linger? Isabella felt that strain too. She recognized the look in Jonathan's eyes, love tempered by wariness. Though he reassured her, she knew it would take time for them to heal. She immersed herself in preparing for the baby, assembling lists of pediatricians, reading parenting blogs, and visiting baby stores with Paola. Yet, whenever her phone buzzed, her heartbeat spiked. One day, while reviewing the new nursery designs, Samantha Lou called Isabella. "I heard about the fiasco with Ethan," she said, her tone surprisingly sympathetic. "He's more trouble than he's worth. Do you want me to leverage any connections to help you handle this quietly?" Isabella paused. The offer was tempting, but felt tainted. She still wasn't entirely sure she could trust Samantha, whose philanthropic facade might hide her own ambitions. "Thank you," Isabella replied carefully. "We have it under control for now, but I appreciate your concern." Samantha sighed. "Just be careful. Men like Ethan rarely give up without a fight." That evening, Jonathan's legal team delivered a preliminary plan. They would document Ethan's blackmail attempts, gather any records that suggested he was involved in illegal activities, and if necessary, threaten him with a counter-lawsuit for extortion. If Ethan continued pressing, they could approach law enforcement with the evidence. While it risked public attention, it would also shield them if Ethan attempted a media smear campaign. Jonathan turned to Isabella. "Are you ready for this?" he asked, sliding the documents across the table. She hesitated, her hand unconsciously cradling her baby bump. "If going public is the last resort, yes," she said. "But I hope we can handle it quietly. I don't want the baby's first memories to be overshadowed by scandal." Jonathan nodded, his gaze softening. "Me too." Yet the next day, a new twist emerged. An envelope arrived at the penthouse via courier, addressed to Isabella. Inside was a folder of photographs, grainy images from years past, depicting her in the company of Ethan and others. Some photos could be misinterpreted as her direct involvement in shady deals or unsavory gatherings. Tucked inside was a note scrawled in black ink. "Still think you can walk away?" When Isabella showed the photographs to Jonathan, her hands trembled. She recognized some of the faces in those photos: real estate swindlers, a rumored arms dealer, and political lobbyists. She had never knowingly engaged in wrongdoing with them, but the photos implied otherwise. Jonathan's jaw clenched. "He's stepping up the pressure," he muttered. They rushed the new evidence to Alexandra. She studied each photo, her expression grave. "These could be damaging if they fall into the wrong hands," she said. "We need to act quickly." It felt like the final straw. Jonathan decided they would confront Ethan directly, but on their terms. They arranged a meeting in a safe, controlled environment. Their plan to record the conversation, corner him into revealing his blackmail scheme, and then provide the evidence to the authorities, if necessary. As the day of the meeting approached, Isabella felt both dread and a flicker of hope. Dread because she'd have to face the man who symbolized her biggest regret. Hope because, if all went well, she and Jonathan might finally break free from his threats. She clung to Jonathan, resting her head on his shoulder. "I'm sorry," she murmured for the 1,000th time. "I never wanted my past to hurt you or our baby." Jonathan kissed the top of her head, his voice barely above a whisper. "No more apologies," he said. "Let's just get through this. Together." They chose a neutral location, a small conference room in a boutique hotel on the Upper West Side. Malcolm oversaw the setup, ensuring hidden recording devices were strategically placed. Alexandra stood by as legal counsel, ready to intervene. Isabella's heart pounded as she waited, seated beside Jonathan at a long table. She felt the baby kick again, as if sensing the tension. Ethan arrived, wearing an arrogant smirk. He barely acknowledged Malcolm or Alexandra. "So this is how it's going to be?" he sneered, tossing a glance at Jonathan. "Dragging lawyers and friends into a private matter?" Jonathan kept his composure, folding his hands on the table. "We're here to resolve this. You claim Isabella owes you something. We'd like to hear your terms." Ethan sniffed, then shifted his focus to Isabella. "I see you've convinced your millionaire boyfriend to fight your battles," he taunted. "But you and I both know you promised to compensate me for certain legal risks I took for you." Isabella looked him straight in the eye. I was never part of your illegal schemes. I only discovered them after the fact. And any talk about me owing you hush money was never official. It was never more than your twisted interpretation of a conversation we had when I was desperate and confused. Her voice trembled slightly, but she pressed on. This extortion ends now. Ethan let out a sharp laugh. Extortion? You're calling it that? He produced his phone, swiping through images. If I show these to the press, you'll both be finished. The great Jonathan Thorne, associated with frauds and criminals through his pregnant girlfriend. Investors will flee. Your philanthropic ventures will be tainted. Imagine the headlines. Alexandra cleared her throat, pushing forward a file. Mr. Walker, we have documented evidence of your blackmail attempts. Text messages, phone call transcripts, that envelope of photographs you sent. The moment you walk out of here, we can file charges with the district attorney's office. The question is whether you want to spend time in prison for this, because the digital footprint is undeniable. Ethan's bravado wavered, though he tried to mask it. You don't scare me. If I go down, I'll make sure Isabella goes down too, and Jonathan's precious image is destroyed. Jonathan leaned forward. You may think you have the upper hand, but you're mistaken. My resources are extensive. I can hire the best legal and investigative teams, and trust me, if we dig deeply into your past deals, we'll find enough to put you away. You have more to lose here than we do, Ethan. Silence enveloped the room as Ethan's eyes darted from Jonathan to Alexandra to Malcolm, then back to Isabella. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that he was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. The hidden devices recorded every word, capturing his threats and the attempted blackmail. He leaned back, trying to regain a shred of dignity. So what do you propose? Alexandra slid a legal document across the table. We have a non-disclosure agreement prepared. In essence, you agree to cease all contact with Ms. Harrington and Mr. Thorne. You also agree not to distribute or discuss any photographs or information pertaining to Isabella's past. In exchange, we won't press charges unless you breach this agreement. And there is no money in it for you, she added firmly. 0. Ethan glared at the document. You expect me to sign away my leverage? Jonathan's voice was cold. It's not leverage, it's a criminal act. We're offering you a chance to walk away without jail time. Take it or leave it. But if you leave it, don't expect any mercy. For a tense moment, Ethan's expression flickered with rage. Then, resignation settled in his features. He took a pen, scanning through the legal language. After a moment's hesitation, he signed. With a flourish, he shoved the pen away. This isn't over, he hissed. You may win this round, but people like me, we always find a way. He shoved back his chair and stormed out. The moment the door closed, Isabella let out a shuddering breath. Her eyes welled with tears as she turned to Jonathan, who gently rubbed her back. Malcolm quietly disassembled the recording devices, while Alexandra tucked the signed document into a folder with a quiet, satisfied nod. In the car ride home, Jonathan held Isabella's hand. It's not a perfect resolution, but it might be enough to keep him away, he said, voice subdued. She nodded, the weight lifting off her shoulders. Thank you, she whispered, resting her head on his shoulder. I'm sorry you had to deal with this. He pressed a kiss to her hair. We're in this together, Bella. Always. Over the next few weeks, life gradually returned to something resembling normalcy. Isabella dove back into her work at the non-profit, though she took a break from the intense demands of event planning. Samantha Liu noticed a new calm in her demeanor, but remained discreet enough not to pry further. The hush agreement seemed to hold. Ethan vanished from their lives, for the time being. Jonathan and Isabella still had unresolved wounds between them. Late-night conversations often included tears, apologies, and reassurances. But slowly, trust began to mend. Family and friends rallied around them, especially as the baby's due date approached. Harriet and Paula fussed over nursery decorations, while Robert and Martin teased Jonathan about fatherhood basics, like changing diapers and warming bottles. On a balmy summer afternoon, Isabella went into labor a few weeks early. Jonathan raced through Manhattan traffic, ignoring speed limits, to get her to the hospital in time. Hours later, as dawn broke, Isabella gave birth to a healthy baby girl with a strong cry and a curious gaze. They named her Eleanor Grace Thorne. Holding Eleanor in his arms, Jonathan felt a warmth that transcended any turbulence they had faced. Tears streaked Isabella's cheeks as she kissed her daughter's forehead. In that moment, all the fear, stress, and mistrust evaporated. They had created a new life, a life that symbolized hope, resilience, and unconditional love. As the weeks went by, Elena became the center of their world. It wasn't a perfect fairy tale. Jonathan and Isabella still had disagreements, occasional flashbacks to Ethan's threats, and concerns about their public image. But they learned that love was not about perfection. It was about facing imperfections head-on and supporting each other through every storm. Isabella would sometimes whisper to Eleanor, "If you only knew how hard we fought for this peace." Jonathan would smile, stroking his daughter's soft hair, grateful that their family had survived the gravest test of trust. He no longer called it a betrayal, he called it a lesson in honesty, vulnerability, and the power of standing united when the past comes knocking. Some nights, they'd lie awake in bed, the lights of the city dancing across their ceiling, and reminisce about the journey that brought them here. Jonathan would promise Isabella that they'd never again let secrets fester between them. And Isabella, lulled by the sight of their sleeping daughter, would feel a sense of wholeness she'd never known before. In time, people largely forgot about Ethan and his threats. Jonathan's philanthropic reputation remained intact. Isabella continued her social work, now with even more empathy for those wrestling with difficult pasts. Together, they wrote a new chapter, a testament to the idea that real loyalty isn't about never making mistakes. It's about owning them, facing the consequences, and emerging stronger. That night of shocking confession at dinner became a dark memory that, ironically, illuminated the depth of their commitment. Jonathan no longer questioned Isabella's loyalty. Instead, he marveled at her courage to face her demons. And Isabella, for all her guilt and anxiety, learned that love grounded in transparency and forgiveness could conquer even the ugliest shadows of the past. Thank you for joining us on this emotional roller coaster, where we witnessed Jonathan and Isabella navigate their deepest fears, secrets, and vulnerabilities, all for the sake of love and the promise of a better future for their child. From hidden blackmail threats to a confession that rocked their world, this story shows how true devotion can weather any storm when trust, honesty, and forgiveness stand at its core. If you enjoyed this dramatic tale and felt your heart racing through every twist and turn, please give this video a like and share it with friends who crave an unforgettable story. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more captivating dramas that explore the complexities of human relationships. Your support helps us bring stories of triumph, heartbreak, and redemption to life, and we can't wait to share more with you.